Welcome to the Coaching Floors podcast. This is Dr. Jen, and each week we'll be doing interviews to inform our listeners about techniques to help children with complex communication needs discover their voice with AAC. Stay tuned. If you're a regular listener, you may have remembered hearing from my friend Trisha, a pre-K teacher. Well, she messaged me recently saying I needed to interview a friend named Laurie. They'd worked together in the past, and recently Laurie has had some personal experience with AAC, and our listeners really needed to hear from her. So, welcome, Laurie.
Thank you.
Laurie, I've had a chance to read some of your story, and it sounds really compelling. Can you maybe share with our listeners a little bit about your background and what happened back in November?
Sure. I received my psychology degree from the University of Iowa in 2000, and I got hired as a special ed para in 2004 for a girl that was labeled as Asperger's at the time, and I had no knowledge of autism or Asperger's, and I had a daughter in 2005 and went on to adopt two kids that were older, one of which had extensive concerns from the foster care system in 2009. And I was searching for something that, I was searching for understanding of the concerns that plagued the one kiddo, and I found an ABA-centered program, and I received my master's in special ed consulting in 2010. And then I went on to get my master's in clinical counseling in 2018 and did my internship at Sassy and Loris. I passed the exam, and 2 weeks later in October, found the perfect career for me as a school-based therapist. And I had the job 2 weeks to the day. And I laid down for a nap because my training got out early and I was really tired. And I woke up to several EMTs in the house.
Oh my gosh.
And thankfully my daughter called because she thought something was wrong. Mm-hmm. And I was told at the ER that I had a brain tumor. And I was transported by ambulance that night to UW. And that was October 25th. So we scheduled a functional MRI for 2 weeks later to determine where my speech center was. And thankfully my doctor did that because I'm the one of 0.5% of the population with my speech center on the dominant side. So the tumor was intertwined.
Oh my goodness.
And I had an awake craniotomy because of that. On November 12th, and some poor soul lost their slot, so I slid into that because he lost his insurance, so it was a bittersweet situation. And I seized on the OR table 4 times. I remember one of the seizures distinctly. If you're looking for an adventure, I don't recommend an awake craniotomy.
Oh my gosh, no kidding.
So I spent Monday through Friday at UW and left in a wheelchair, having little speech and all sorts of spinning, double vision, light sensitivity, nausea, and echolalia. And I didn't have any use of my entire left side. And I entered Mercy Rehab for a week and continued with outpatient speech and OT after that. And it turned out to be a stage 2 astrocytoma, brain cancer, and I was diagnosed at 39. So the most common question I get is, were there any symptoms? No, but looking back, I told my husband that it seemed like it was new material every day when I was studying for my exam, so that may have been a hint. We're on a watch and wait protocol currently, and there's going to be collateral damage, as my radiation oncologist says, because they can't avoid the speech center when they blast the tumor. So I'm putting it off as long as possible. I have every 3-month MRIs and follow-up appointments. So I continue to rehab at home. I've been assessed by a psychologist, and my working memory is not good, so I probably won't return to work anytime soon. And honestly, I feel like a ticking time bomb. So my most common common response to questions, to the common question of where do you work at, because people attach so much importance to work, is I'm going to take a gap year. So I'm taking a gap year.
Nice. Oh, that sounds like the perfect thing to say.
Well, frequently, I often get asked at the doctor because they want a work number. So I don't know what to say. And I thought, I need to come up with something, because they don't need to know my situation. And I don't feel like explaining it all the time. And it just would lead down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's become kind of a common phrase in our language in society. So it's an acceptable and easy way to say, I'm off right now.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with me. So what has changed for you? You had done all of the studies, you're a mom, and you've got this special interest in special education and helping children, but what has changed for you since that happened, and maybe what hasn't changed?
Well, my family support and humor hasn't changed, but pretty much everything else has. I'm no longer going a million miles an hour, and the support of my family is extensive, and I used to be fiercely independent, so that's been a hard topic for me and for everyone else, because I frequently need help. I am not afraid to admit it now, but I was in the past, and I can't execute my humor in the way I used to. I've always had quick wit and, had a really dry sense of humor, and I feel like I talk like a robot. I don't think I do. The speech pathologist didn't have any indications that I was robotic in my speech, but I feel like I sound like a robot. And I've always been very comfortable talking on the fly. That's all ended. This situation right here, I wouldn't have any qualms about being asked questions on the fly, and I would be able to have them answers ready on the spot. But I had to write out my thoughts, and I'm stumbling over them. So, there are lost opportunities, and I feel like I can't connect with people as much, and I'm kind of isolated. And brain tumors, cancer, and speech issues will do that to you. And if you find a way around one of those topics, the next one pops up, it seems. And I liken it to medical whack-a-mole. So
you have so much good stuff to share, and I'm like wanting to jump in, and then I'm like, no, listen, just listen. So I'm like, do I go back to something or not? Do you feel like you're being too hard on yourself sometimes?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I haven't noticed any robotic speech, even without the script. And normally when I interview anyone, I email them this, and a lot of people type out their responses ahead of time. So, and you saw me. I've got my script here for the introduction. So I don't know if maybe you might be a little hard on yourself from time to time.
Oh, for sure. But I hold myself to a high standard. And if I didn't hold myself to a high standard, I think it'd be easy to fall into a rut and say, like, get depressed.
Yeah. And become more isolated and that sort of thing.
I have to hold myself to a high standard because I have my kids watching me, my family watching me. I'm really public about my medical situation. And, I've talked to Senator Yoakum and Senator James, and I've talked to them about the insurance struggles and whatever have you. But I think that if I didn't have high standards, it'd be easy to let myself slip.
Mm-hmm. And you're trying to get back to a routine and who you feel you are.
Yeah.
Thank you. The next one. You had studied and trained as a special education consultant and worked with kids who struggled with communication. How has your perception changed or grown since the seizure and tumor?
Well, I told my friend Trisha that, and one of my previous parents, that I had worked with their kid, that I thought I had empathy for kids' situations, but I really didn't have the empathy level that I perceived. It's a whole different ballgame when you get thrown into this situation. And really, you're all alone in your head, as are kids, and that's a scary place for a lot of people. And I can't imagine what kids feel, because, people go through life and I think have various experiences that shape them, and kids really don't have much experience in life, and they don't really know, well, is this normal? What are people feeling? Do they feel like me? And, do I share this experience? As much as people want to think that they know what people are thinking, they really don't. And I look back all the time and think of kids that were acting out, and I can't help but think that I truly didn't know what they wanted. And I thought that I knew, and it was obviously, armchair quarterback on, Monday morning. And imagine a kid who is new at English, which is a pretty complicated language itself, and needs help navigating, and has speech, cognitive, physical issues, or trauma to boot. It's literally exhausting.
I picture it with becoming a mom. When I was a teacher prior to being a mom, I felt I was empathetic to the students' parents. But then when I became a mom, I was a totally different teacher.
Yep.
And my principal had known me as a teacher when he was an instructional coach. And then he became my principal several years later after I'd become a mom. And I went to him right away and said, I'm a different teacher now that I'm a mom. And I said, you're going to see me be more emotional and do this and that and really be able to empathize with parents. So I'm not you need to use the devices at home and all these expectations, because I know what it takes to get dinner on the table and teeth brushed at night and my kids in bed. So I really have changed my perspective in becoming a mom. So I'm sure that that this has played a role in you being able to really empathize with others. So we think that we can, but then until you're in those shoes, you really can't.
And really, if you're in those shoes, it's different for everybody.
No one's going to have that same experience.
Yeah, I've learned that from my therapy days, from my internships, because, there were similar situations. Everybody had struggles with grades at, the college placement that I had. But people always had different issues surrounding, what made them struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Was it like a parent fighting cancer back home? Was it a roommate issue? Was there a professor that was really difficult for, was there a time management issue? There's always different sets of circumstances.
Mm-hmm. And you had talked about, too, I don't know if this is relevant or not, we don't know what the child wants to say.
Yeah.
I listen to my 4-year-old talk, and the other day he said, like, Mom, did they put the neighbor in the trunk? What are you talking about? He was asking if a person was in the ambulance riding to the hospital. But I know if my 4-year-old son has that thought and wondering about, as we're driving down the highway, what this ambulance is doing, all of our children have those kinds of thoughts. And how do we anticipate that? And how do if we have speech-generating devices or textbooks, how are they able to ask those same questions and get their ideas, like, why is that bird outside? Like just all those things that little kids wonder. I don't feel right now that our devices are maybe enough yet.
No.
And so I'm really having a hard time with that because I want our children to be able to express anything they're thinking.
I used to have a student that I loved dearly, and he had a device, and every day at snack, it was invariable. He always kind of was peckish because he really didn't like the thing that we set out, and I gave him the device the one day, and he navigated to tell me that he wanted a cheeseburger. And then he laughed and laughed and laughed. And he had humor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't ever think that, it never dawned on me that kids see things in a funny way, too.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they're, like, communication challenged.
Yeah. They find a way to tease you, too.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, that shows just how intelligent they are,
And then he tried the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and...
That's a little joke between you two. That's funny. Thank you, Laurie, for sharing with us. We will wrap up with part 2 next week. If you could, subscribe to the podcast so you get notified when new episodes are released, and check out Coaching Flores on Facebook and coachingflores.com for downloads. I hope you heard something that inspires you. I'll see you next week.